Welcome to the third and final episode of What I Wish I Knew Before I Started Support Raising. I'm here again with Miles and Mike and Joe. In the previous episode, we looked at the power of partnership, and we also touched on the area of asking for support. In this episode, we're going to ask some questions around money and finance. For example, how much should I raise? And we're also going to look at the importance of training and coaching in support raising. When working out how much you should be raising, there are various factors to take into account. You may be with an organisation who gives you a target or a budget. If you're an individual recipient with Stewardship, we will calculate a target for you. This is based on the role that you're doing, where you are in the world, whether you're married or single, and the number of dependents that you have. We then take off any other income that you may have, which would have been declared on your application form. And this kind of forms a target for you to aim at. It's also the maximum amount of charitable funds that we can give you per year. So it's the highest amount to go for. So I mentioned tax and national insurance there. So it's your responsibility, if you're receiving funds, to make sure that you are paying the right tax in the country in which you're based. So you may need to look into that. If you're in the UK, you can contact HMRC, look on their website, or you can speak to a tax advisor. So having a target helps in that it can take the guesswork out of how much you should raise. It's probably more than you think you should be raising, because we tend to kind of go to the minimum amount we can get away with, as we looked at in previous episodes. And the things that we would kind of scrap first would be things like savings or holidays, and they're really important things. So when I did the training with Stewardship after my 5 years in Bolivia living on support, I realized that I should have been saving more for the future. And that was something that I wish I knew before I started support raising. So we do look at this on the training. We spend a good amount of time looking at planning for the future and how much and savings and those kind of things.
I think another thing, Caroline, to think about when we're looking at this issue of planning and saving for the future is thinking about how we think about it from a theological or a spiritual point of view. Sometimes we feel like planning and saving for the future is not compatible with trusting God to provide for us. But, you know, would we go out of our house and leave the front door unlocked just because we trust that God will protect our home? Or, you know, when I go out cycling, I still wear a bike helmet, even though I still believe in the providence of God. So it's important to understand that planning for the future is not the opposite of trusting God.
Yeah, and the Apostle Paul, writing to Timothy, said, if you don't take care of the needs of your immediate family, you've denied the faith and are worse than an unbeliever. That's a very scary place to be. But to be truthful, I've seen many missionaries wander far too close to that. They are not providing adequately for their families, sometimes in the immediate future, and often in the longer term. So they end up being very materialistic. Being materialistic isn't having material goods, it's thinking about material goods too much. And many missionaries fall into that category. So even simple things like providing for Christmas, you know, December is an expensive month. So it makes sense to set aside some of September, October, November to cover December, because it's going to cost more and you don't have more funds to apply to it. Similarly, even in the longer term, looking over lifetime, there are years that you might have a little bit more that you can set aside for those years in the future where there may be a bit of a crunch on your finances because some supporters have had to stop. So the thing I would say in summary is just make sure you are taking care of the needs of the family in the immediate and in the longer term, because you don't want to be getting too close to denying the faith and being worse than an unbeliever. And I have seen that happen, and it's a sad place to be.
Yeah, Miles, you talk about the longer term. Interestingly, as we get older, so do our supporters. And there might come a time where they need to stop giving because they're retiring, because their financial circumstances change hugely. And so that has an impact on us. And of course, actually, we might want to retire too. We might want to change circumstances. Whilst we think we're going to live on the support of others for the foreseeable future, often when you're starting out, you're not thinking about what's going to happen much later in life. So you need to plan for that time. I heard from somebody just this week who's 79 and she's still working because she hadn't really planned adequately for retirement. She planned to stay on support, but that support mostly dried up when she retired and when she moved back to the UK. So we have to think about the future and plan for it. And as you've just illustrated with your Christmas December illustration, put aside something earlier in life to plan for that time where everything is going to, circumstances are going to change, when you're going to return to the UK, when you're going to retire, when your supporters are perhaps going to retire or stop supporting you because of change in circumstances.
Thanks, guys. You might not be convinced yet, but we spend a lot of time again on our training looking at the importance of planning for the future and the concept of savings and pensions. Is living on support financially secure?
I think a lot of people feel that living on support is really risky and is not financially secure. They tend to think that having a salary is safer, and they have lots of questions about what happens when people stop giving. But if your income comes from different sources, the risk is actually spread. So it's great if you have a salary, but then if that salary stops, you have zero income. With COVID, we've seen the devastating impact of sudden job loss by people who thought that their jobs and their salaries were secure. Whereas in the first month of COVID during lockdown at Stewardship, we actually saw giving to Christian workers go up and not down, because people who support Christian workers are really committed to those individuals, and in a crisis they rally around them. It's important to think as well, it's okay for people to stop supporting you. That's not a crisis. All that is an opportunity for you to invite somebody else into your team to be a partner in the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and when you think about it, even from the perspective of the supporter, if they lose their job, 100% of their income goes. But in our case, it might just be 3 or 4% of our income goes because that person has to stop supporting us. And it's much easier for me to replace their support with another partner than it is for them to find another job, particularly in today's economic climate. So in reality, it takes far more faith to work in a bank these days than it does to work as a missionary. I wouldn't encourage people to go into mission to find financial security. But I will say that it is certainly a financially secure way of living, simply because of that spread of sources of income, as you said, Joe.
When I was in Bolivia, and one of the first few months there, some of the Bolivian girls invited me to go to get a manicure done with them. So I went along as a chance to get to know them, and it cost £1.50. So it was like a little treat. And when I say manicure, it was kind of basic, but it was just nice to be around them and get to know them a bit, but also, a new culture and trying to adapt. So it was just something positive, and I wrote about it just in my newsletter, and someone came back to me, and I can't remember the exact comment, but it was something around kind of, I didn't think you'd gone there for manicures, or it mentioned, about spending money on a manicure. And I thought, well, I've given up my family, my friends, my country, my language, my culture, everything. Like, where's the problem in having a £1.50 manicure just to get to know some girls, or even just to have a treat myself? And I struggled with that. So Miles, can we go to you? Do supporters determine how you use your funds, or how much should they influence how you spend that money?
Yeah, a good question. I've never had the manicure problem myself, I must admit. But sometimes people make comments, and they are joking, and they're not meant as serious questions, but they can hurt in the context in which you receive them. But sometimes the comments are made out of a misunderstanding of who owns the money. Sometimes the supporters think, you are spending my money. No, I'm not. I'm spending God's money, similar to they are spending God's money. So the responsibility that I have and the supporter has is under God. Am I comfortable under God with what I'm doing with the resources God has entrusted to me? And it's a bit, again, back to the Levites. When God set up the first structured support system, he said, I give to the Levites all the tithes. I am their inheritance. Now, I'm sure the people who gave the tithes thought they were actually doing the giving, but God was very clear in this. No, he is the person who gives. And having lived in support ourselves now for over 45 years, so long as I'm comfortable under God with how we're using the money entrusted to us, I'm happy enough with that. And we have had some conversation with supporters about our use of money, but I've also then asked them, well, how do you view your view of money? What's your theology of how you use your money? Because I think sometimes the discussion between a missionary and a supporter is one of the few discussions a supporter will ever have about their theology of giving and their theology of money. And on occasion, I've used that opportunity just to discuss things with them. And sometimes they end up thinking, actually, we haven't been very good stewards. So it's to do with, first of all, them understanding that the ownership of the money belongs to God always. It never belongs to them or to us. And secondly, that we each need to be good stewards of that money, but we don't control each other. We sit equally under God on this.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Miles. Another tricky one that comes up is holidays. And should you have a holiday? And since being in this role, I've heard more kind of givers say to me, yeah, well, I support maybe an individual and I see their photos of holiday on Facebook and I think, is that what I'm funding? So Mike, can we go to you? Should those living on support use those funds to go on a holiday?
Yeah, well, first of all, it'll come as no surprise to most people that those that are in mission and ministry suffer from burnout, probably more than most other categories of work, because they're completely absorbed in what they do, particularly those in mission, because that's the one I'm familiar with. As you've already said, Caroline, in a different culture, going away from home, giving up all that you have, that's completely absorbing. So you need an opportunity to have a break from that situation that's stressful 24/7, basically. So R&R, taking some time out, is really important for those in mission and ministry. You become a liability if you don't take that time out. And those types of people are unlikely to spend huge sums of money on luxury holidays. Most of the people I know in this situation scrape a holiday together financially rather than have enough money to spend on something luxurious. So if you're partnering with somebody in ministry, it's really important that you make sure they are getting enough breaks and they're getting away and they're taking those times out. I think it's part of your duty of care as one of their partners in their ministry. And it's also part of encouragement that you make sure they have that time out. Sometimes people give specific gifts to take a holiday, and that's great. The good thing in that situation is they recognize that a holiday is very important. So they give a particular gift for the full-time Christian worker to take a holiday or a break. But I think that's a bit sporadic, if you like. It's not that common. So it's much better if you build it in to your budget and your plan, that you put aside an amount for holiday in that, so that you've always got it there when you need it, rather than you're waiting for the next specific gift to come for a holiday.
So we've introduced you to various concepts which people often wish they knew before they started support raising. They're all areas which we cover in more depth on our training. So let's look at the importance of both training and coaching in support raising. Mike, could you kick us off?
Yeah, I'm amazed after so many years of doing this, how little training people get in order to support raise for their personal support. Some people get none, but others do just a little session. And considering how important it is in order for mission and ministry to happen, that's quite startling to me now. So I think it is really important that people get proper, decent training before they start support raising, and then they often need top-up training as they go along. And that should involve, various things. One is you need to know what support raising is all about, and then you also need to know how to go about it, so there's some skills to learn. But I think it's also important to learn how to stay focused and motivated when you're living on the support of others, because at various times in the journey, it's quite tempting to be led off to raise funds in some other means, aside from the one that God's called you to do. So you need to stay on track, and training is one way of helping you do that.
Yeah, and as Mike said, that the training gives that focus, helps you learn the skills, learn the understanding. But to make the training work in practice, that needs some sort of ongoing coaching. And if organizations are bad at offering training, sometimes they are worse at offering coaching. There are very few organizations that offer good personal support coaching to their staff. And by coaching, I don't mean just a shoulder to cry on when things aren't going well. I mean someone to hold you accountable, to help you achieve what you want to achieve. I mean, even for us, we've been working on our own on a support basis for 45 years, and I still feel nervous making that phone call. That nervousness has never gone away. And I still need somebody to say to me, did you make that phone call? How did that go? Let's pray about it. But what I found is that if I need to work on my support, if there's a gap that I need to fill in our support, I'm tempted to do it next week. A coach will help me do it this week when it needs to be done. The coaching also helps explore issues in your life, because for me, why am I nervous making that phone call? It's not, I mean, I know how to make phone calls, I do it all the time. But for me, it's that sense of inadequacy, self-worth that's been with me all my life. How do I deal with that? I need a coach to help me overcome that. Difficult to overcome it on its own. So the training is helpful. I would encourage you to come to it, but I also encourage you find someone who will help the training become a reality by coaching you on an ongoing basis. Otherwise, you hit the first roadblock, because you will hit them. And then you think, oh, that didn't work. You just need someone to say, okay, why did that not work? What were the issues there? Let's pray about this. I'll talk to you again next week, see how it's going.
We really need to recognise that support raising is a spiritual and a discipleship process for us, and it's a discipleship process for our supporters. And I think the thing that coaching does is it really helps you, as Miles saying, it helps you discover, are there particular things that are holding you back? You know, are you holding wrongly held beliefs about God or about yourself or about others? Coaching, having a little bit of space, coaching really helps you get to the heart of what those issues are and helps you to move forward.
So in this episode, we've looked at some of the questions that we get around finance in support raising, and we've also looked at the importance of training and coaching in support raising. In this What I Wish I Knew Before I Started Support Raising mini-series, we've really tried to get across the idea that there's so much to learn, to consider, to ponder with regards to support raising, and how to build a really effective partnership team to enable you to do the work that God has called you to. We've just scraped the surface in this series, hoping to leave you thirsty for more. We hope you'll continue the journey by signing up for our support raising training. We'd love to get to know you and to walk the journey with you.